This is update for January 21st, 2025, day 1063 of the war and of the date of date. Also catch up for January 20th and January 19th. I'm going to start with general updates and then I'm going to switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. General updates is I want to discuss a little bit new policy by the new US president. He signed a bunch of executive orders yesterday, and the most important part is that it seems that he is determined to deliver on what he was promising, and that really means radical changes. The most important ones is that he is definitely reversing this green energy policy. I wouldn't say he's completely done. I think he probably more did like first initial steps there. So he enabled basically energy exploration. This means not just oil and gas, but also coal, basically all sorts of energy, including nuclear energy. What this really means is this probably a good step. However, all of this oil and gas or mining companies, they cannot rely on executive orders because they are long-term focused projects, which the horizon is at least 10 years, more likely 15, 20, up to 30 years. And so they cannot just hope that, okay, 4 years, and then if the new administration comes in 4 years and the switch totally flips in the opposite direction, like it actually did with the Biden administration, they essentially, it's going to be loss of the money for this natural resource companies. So they will not be actively investing. So this is, I would say, more a gesture, initial gesture, that probably U.S. president is determined to change the course, to change the policy, but it's certainly not enough, and it's not going to change the course because at this point, the only way to change the course is to actually pass the law to protect these investments. Otherwise, these companies said they're simply not going to be investing. It's too risky. As I said, they already know that the switch already flipped in a negative direction for them, and nobody's going to risk capital unless they have it sort of guaranteed for the long-term horizon. The other part that was important is the new president lifted the electric vehicle mandate, which obviously, again, positive. In this case, it actually makes it easier for auto manufacturer in the US and I would say even European ones. And this actually will not require any sort of laws because that's what most manufacturers are producing. And then if they not required to switch to EV, they will not. So this really actually is sort of moving needle in the right direction without really needing any legislative action. At the same time, I would say that if U.S. president and obviously U.S. Parliament delivers and guarantees future for all of these natural resource companies, this will put tremendous pressure on Europe and essentially will economically bankrupt Europe pretty quickly, and more specifically Germany. Obviously, UK is there because these countries are already tremendously weak due to this so-called green energy policies, and so this will lead to basically economic implosion in short order because essentially all of them, not all, but most of the manufacturers will simply flee to the US. They were not fleeing so far, despite all of this sort of stories, especially from Russian propaganda, that Europe is losing industry to US. That was not really happening. But it actually may happen, and that's becoming sort of more realistic. And again, this will then precipitate political. That will actually make even more stronger political changes in Europe. They already sort of starting, but that will make sort of um, earthquake type of changes in Europe. If this were to happen, again, this is still a big question, still unclear if U.S. president is gonna do it through the parliament. So again, this is one big question. But so far, initial steps seem to be in the right direction. The other things that actually affecting Ukraine is, and I would say negatively affecting Ukraine, is that the U.S. president throws all of the sort of financial help to any country outside of the U.S., basically all foreign countries, and obviously Ukraine is included there. There's also reports from Washington Post that all of the people who were involved in Pentagon with helping military help to Ukraine, they were all either fired, dismissed, or transferred. So essentially, all of this essentially military help for Ukraine, it seems like it stopped completely, and in some ways, Ukraine is prepared because it received significant amount of military supplies from the outgoing presidential administration. So there is some sort of inventory to get by for some time. But again, this obviously Ukraine doesn't have viable solution, and this goes back to essentially problems in Ukraine itself, in Ukrainian government, Ukrainian president specifically, that Ukraine had 3 years to build its own armament, ammunition production industry, and so on, military production industry. Ukraine had everything for it. There's no problem, and even Ukraine can have moved some of the most sensitive manufacturing facilities to countries like Poland, or Lithuania, or Latvia, or Estonia. So there's obviously opportunity to solve the problem, just to avoid Russian missile strikes. But it's never been done, and essentially, Ukrainian leadership decided to beg around the world instead of actually solving the problem with its own resources, which Ukraine did have, and actually was plenty of resources to solve its own problems. So now Ukraine is definitely going to be in difficult situation. I don't think Europe is going to be solution, simply because Europe is losing its self-manufacturing base, and there's definitely no desire to ramp up military production. So far, all of this discussion in Europe about preparedness for potential conflict with Russia, this is just more just empty words, really. So that's going to be, again, a problem for Ukraine, but it's sort of problem of its own making. Nobody, force Ukraine to rely and beg instead of actually produce its own. Then switching a little bit to Russia, Russian president had a relatively, I would say, long call with Chinese president, where they actually discussed how to sync up their next steps with respect to the US. So basically, they were preparing how to react probably to Panama Canal, probably to Greenland movements, and general coordination, probably also around Ukraine. That's all in a nutshell. In general, in terms of general updates, there's not much economically happened over past couple days. In terms of U.S. economy, the labor market is still there. The situation is the same what I mentioned before. There is essentially not much, very little, few layoffs. But then, if someone loses the job, it's really hard to find a new job. So that remains true. And again, I would say looks like labor market will continue in the U.S. unless there's drastic changes in economic policy, or U.S. hits the problem with the governmental debt, which is definitely looming. And I mentioned about interest rates and so on. So that's going to be essentially a trigger for potential sovereign debt problem in the U.S., and that's also true for the rest of the Western world. So it's very true for the UK, for Canada, for France. Sure, Germany is not far away there. Sort of Spain. All essentially nobody's immune from this problem. Now I'm gonna switch to situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. Gonna do a quick walkthrough in a clockwise fashion, the way I always do, starting from north, and we're gonna jump into Kursk region of Russia, where Russian troops continuing slow squeeze of Ukrainian forces out of the Kursk region. No sort of major villages were retaken by Russian troops, so there is not much of update. No, the attacks on Sudzha has not started yet by Russian forces, so say there's not much to update here. Now let's move to situation north and northeast of Kharkiv. Things here also on pause. Not much is going on. Now let's move to North Donbas. North Lugansk front line. Situation remains more or less stable in terms of no major losses by Ukrainian side. So that's what I mean. Russian troops continuing pressure and attempts to capture village Kolodzy here, which is, I would say, critical village, because that's next step towards capturing Liman, because that's what's immediate goal here. So far, Ukrainian forces were able to contain Russian troops, but doesn't mean that this is sort of solved in terms of long-term situation. Also, Russian troops are advancing north of Kupiansk. I mentioned before, they managed to cross Oskil River, establish bridgeheads on the western side, and slowly but surely expanding those. I'll provide update sort of on the map once things become sort of more critical there. Now let's move south to North Donbass front line. The northern sector is quiet, really not much going on there. The southern sector, the only area that's sort of active is Chasiv Yar, where Ukrainian forces still manage to hold on to the western outskirts of the town and slowly retreating south of Chasiv Yar and towards village Stupachki. So basically, not much in terms of territorial losses, but they're sort of they're in the making, they're looming there. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here somewhat relatively stable. Russian pressure continues. The only sort of area of advance for Russian troops so far is around Dudachne and Kotlyne, and actually we're gonna look in more detail. So what happened? Russian troops managed to capture Kotlyne on the 19th and actually advanced quite far. I didn't update because this is the only area where there's meaningful change, but they actually managed to get where I'm showing with the red arrow, almost halfway to this road E50, and then actually then they also turned west, and they preparing to attack this coking coal mine, which was very important, and obviously now it's lost. And they are assaulting the village Udachne, and basically half of it is already under Russian control. So, as you can imagine, it's going to be lost probably in a matter of a week or a couple of weeks. I would say a couple of weeks, probably not too much, but most likely in fairly short order. So those are only meaningful changes and advances by Russian troops. Situation south of Pokrovsk is relatively stable. The only active sort of area of fighting is around Velyka Novosilka, where Russian troops managed to create very narrow bottleneck, and then now they're squeezing Ukrainian troops in that half pocket from northeast and south and southeast, and essentially trying to sort of push Ukrainian forces out of this half pockets through that bottleneck, which will cause significant losses for Ukrainian forces. So the withdrawal from this village is not gonna be sort of without heavy casualties at this point by Ukrainian forces. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. Since here are completely stable, not much is going on here. And then I'll finish with the situation along the Dnipro River, where things also quiet, not much is going on here. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.